It began like an ordinary evening, a warm night in Denton, Texas, a college town winding down after a typical weekday. The bars along Fry Street were buzzing, the music low, and the drinks flowing. But by the next morning, that calm would be shattered, replaced by horror, disbelief, and a case that would haunt the state for years to come. At 6:40 a.m., Grapevine firefighters responded to a call about a small fire near the wooded shoreline of Grapevine Lake. At first, it seemed like someone had left behind a campfire or maybe burned trash. But as they got closer, their flashlights landed on something far more chilling: a young woman's body, partially burned, lying in a shallow ditch. Her hands and feet bound, her face unrecognizable. It wouldn't take long for the authorities to identify her. Jacqueline Vandegrift, known to friends and family, as Jackie, was a 24-year-old student at Texas Woman's University. Bright, artistic, with a laugh that people described as unforgettable. She had dreams of working in child psychology. Her friends say she was the kind of person who made everyone feel safe, till the night she wasn't. When news broke that Jackie had been found murdered, the reaction was immediate and emotional. Her parents were blindsided. Friends at school gathered in tears. Even Grapevine, a community not unfamiliar with crime, seemed stunned by the brutality. And while many feared this was a random act, detectives were already beginning to suspect it wasn't. In fact, they had a name, and he had already left a digital trail. Charles Dean Bryant, 30 years old, outwardly average, personal trainer who spent most of his time in and around the college scene, frequenting bars, mingling with younger women. But to those who had crossed paths with him, especially women, he left behind a different impression: controlling, manipulative, unpredictable, and in Jackie's case, lethal. Detectives immediately began piecing together the final hours of Jackie's life. Surveillance footage placed her at a bar near the University of North Texas. She had been out that evening, smiling, dancing, talking to people, alone but comfortable. And then Charles. He appeared in the footage later that night, approaching her, engaging, offering drinks. In one frame, they leave together. It would be the last time Jackie was seen alive. In the hours following the discovery of Jackie Vandegrift's body, detectives began an urgent and methodical reconstruction of her last known movements. The timeline was hazy at first. No immediate witnesses to a crime, no weapon found at the scene. But it was Jackie's digital footprint that began to guide investigators toward the truth. Her social media accounts showed activity from the early evening before her murder. A series of Snapchats, mostly harmless laughing selfies, music from the bar, ambient chatter in the background. Then a pause. Radio silence. Cell tower pings placed her phone near the University Bar District around midnight. And then, nothing. The phone was shut off. Not lost, not dead, deliberately powered down. A choice someone made. That someone, detectives believed, was Charles Bryant. He wasn't a stranger to the system. In fact, just weeks before Jackie's death, Charles had been arrested for stalking another woman, Caitlin, a former romantic interest who had grown increasingly fearful of his obsessive behavior. He would appear unannounced at her apartment, call and text incessantly, hack her social accounts. When she blocked him on one app, he found her on another. She filed a police report. She was granted a protective order. But the charges were eventually dropped. There wasn't enough to hold him. Now, just a short time later, Jackie was dead. And Charles's name surfaced again, like a shadow circling back. Caitlin's interview with detectives would prove pivotal. She sat down at the station days after the murder, hands trembling, voice tight. "When I saw his picture on the news, I couldn't breathe," she said. "He had tried to contact me the same day Jackie was killed. He messaged me again even after everything." It turned out Charles had sent Caitlin a chilling text on the morning Jackie's body was discovered. It was vague, almost philosophical. Some people don't get what they deserve. Others do. She didn't respond. She didn't know what it meant. But now, sitting across from investigators, she was starting to understand. The detectives asked her about Charles's habits, his patterns, his obsessions, and what she described mirrored what Jackie's friends would later reveal. "He wanted control," Caitlin said. "It was never about love. He liked being the one to make decisions, to know where you were, what you were doing. If you pushed back, Even a little, he would become someone else. Cold, dead behind the eyes. Meanwhile, law enforcement had begun searching Charles Bryant's apartment. The search warrant yielded what would soon become the backbone of the prosecution's case. Inside, they found zip ties, duct tape, an empty gas can, a digital scale with trace biological evidence, and perhaps most disturbing of all, a shovel still coated in fresh dirt. Back at the crime lab, forensics ran the DNA from under Jackie's fingernails. It was a match for Charles. The injuries on her body were consistent with both restraint and attempted escape. She had fought back. But even with this overwhelming evidence, one question loomed above all. Why Jackie? The two had never dated. They weren't in a long-term relationship. They met that night at the bar, a chance encounter. But for Charles, it was more than enough. For a man like him, Jackie's openness, her warmth, her trusting nature, it made her a target. It's not because of who she was, but because of what he saw in her. A moment of vulnerability, an opportunity. What Charles didn't anticipate was the storm that would follow. The media coverage intensified. Students at Texas Woman's University and the University of North Texas held candlelight vigils. Posters of Jackie's smiling face were hung across the city. And her friends, led by Caitlin, began to speak out, turning their grief into a call for awareness about digital stalking, trauma bonds, and the red flags so often dismissed as drama. The arrest of Charles Dean Bryant didn't bring the relief people expected, not right away. For many in Denton, and especially for Jackie's loved ones, his name was too familiar, too ordinary. It was hard to grasp that someone who had once casually mingled at campus events, who had sipped beers at the same bars and struck up conversations like any other local, was now at the center of one of the most horrific murder cases the area had ever seen. But what shocked investigators even more than the brutality of the crime was how Charles responded once he was taken into custody. During the initial interrogation, Charles walked in with a calm demeanor. No hand-wringing, no visible signs of fear. He sat across from two detectives, eyes steady, shoulders relaxed, as if he were walking into a business meeting. His voice never rose above a whisper. "I don't know anything about a girl near Grapevine," he said flatly. "You've got the wrong guy." But the detectives knew otherwise. They began slow asking about his whereabouts that night, how much he drank, if he remembered meeting anyone. Charles gave vague answers. "I might have gone out. I don't really remember." But the officers didn't let him lead. They pulled out the footage from the bar. There he was, laughing, leaning over the table toward Jackie, his hand on her shoulder, then leaving with her. Still, Charles didn't flinch. He leaned back and sighed. "That doesn't mean anything happened," talked. "She was nice." But then they brought out the evidence. The shovel with soil from Grapevine Lake. The gas can with traces of an accelerant that matched the type used at the scene. The zip ties. The text to Caitlin. The DNA under Jackie's fingernails. For the first time, his jaw tightened. "You're building a story," he said. "You're trying to make me into a monster." To which one detective replied, "You did that yourself, Charles?" Still, he refused to confess. And so, the case moved forward without a confession, but with a powerful arsenal of physical and digital evidence. The prosecution meticulously built a timeline surveillance footage. Cell phone tower data, GPS logs from Jackie's phone, and even social media metadata, which showed that Jackie's accounts were accessed briefly in the hours after her death. Charles had tried to delete messages. He had attempted to erase digital traces, but he wasn't careful enough. At the trial, the courtroom was a sea of silence when Jackie's parents took the stand. Her mother, holding a framed photo of Jackie at her 24th birthday party, couldn't hold back tears. "She was just beginning," she said. "She trusted people to easily, but that's what made her so good. She believed people deserved a chance." The prosecutor then played a clip from Jackie's school project video she had recorded, just weeks before her death, for a psychology course, where she spoke about trauma healing and why she wanted to work with children who had survived abuse. Her voice echoed through the courtroom, bright and full of hope. She wanted to help people rebuild, her professor later said. She saw the best in people, even when they didn't see it in themselves. The defense struggled to build a case. They tried to argue that Charles's prior behavior didn't prove guilt. that his interactions with Jackie were consensual, that the crime scene evidence had been mishandled, though no actual mishandling was ever proven. The jurors remained unmoved. But it was Caitlin's testimony that delivered a chilling final blow. She recounted how Charles had stalked her, how his tone would change from charming to controlling in an instant, how she had feared for her life even before Jackie's murder. Her voice shook, but she didn't waver. He was a master manipulator, made you feel special just long enough to get close. Then he turned cold, detached. It was like he flipped a switch. She paused, looking directly at Charles. Could have been Jackie. Any of us could have. As the trial approached its conclusion, the weight of every moment grew heavier, not just for Jackie's family and friends, but for the jurors, the press, the courtroom staff, even the seasoned detectives who had seen more crime scenes than they cared to remember. This case was different. It wasn't just the brutality of what happened, it was the contrast. The shocking duality of a young woman full of light, extinguished by a man whose darkness had quietly gone unnoticed for too long. In closing arguments, the prosecution did not rely on theatrics. They simply laid out the facts, fact after fact, like puzzle pieces finally locking into place. The surveillance footage of Jackie and Charles, the cell tower data that placed them near Grapevine Lake, the shovel, the accelerant, the DNA, the text messages, the burner account created on a messaging app found on Charles's laptop, and finally, Jackie's lifeless body found partially burned. As if he had tried to destroy not just the evidence, but the very existence of the young woman he had lured in just hours before. This was not a moment of passion, the prosecutor told the jury. This was a calculated, cold-blooded murder, followed by attempts to manipulate and erase. He didn't just kill Jackie, he tried to rewrite her final chapter. Charles's defense, however, leaned into desperation. They suggested that Jackie's death was the result of a consensual encounter gone wrong. That Charles panicked and made bad decisions, but hadn't meant to harm her. They even attempted to cite his mental health history, something the prosecution quickly dismantled with records showing he had refused treatment multiple times. Believing he could handle it on his own, the most powerful rebuttal didn't come from lawyers. It came from Jackie herself through her journal. Found in her apartment during the investigation, the journal was filled with personal entries, notes about her goals, fears, and thoughts. One entry dated just a week before her death read, "I know I'm not invincible, but I want to believe that people are mostly good, that I can meet someone, connect, and not be hurt." The room fell into silence as the prosecutor read those words aloud. Even members of the jury reportedly looked away, shaken by the rawness of her voice reaching them from beyond the grave. After 3 days of deliberation, the jury returned. We find the charge of capital murder. We find the defendant, Charles Dean Bryant, guilty. A wave of emotions surged through the courtroom. Jackie's parents held each other, their shoulders trembling. Caitlin sat in the second row, quietly crying. Even some of the officers who had worked the case for months couldn't contain the tears. During sentencing, the judge did not mince words. You took a life not in a moment of rage, but in a moment of manipulation and control. You tried to erase her from the world, but all you did was make her legacy stronger. You will spend the rest of your life facing that truth. Charles Bryant was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, but Jackie's story didn't end in that courtroom. After the trial, her parents launched a foundation in her name, the Jackie Vandegrift Foundation for Safer Campus Communities. It focuses on educating students about the dangers of digital stalking, dating violence, and red flag behavior often overlooked in young relationships. Seminars were held across Texas colleges. Caitlin became a spokesperson for the foundation, sharing her own story in hopes that others would see the warning signs sooner. "I still think about her every day," she said during a college campus event. "I remember her laughter, her energy, her kindness. And I remember how quickly everything changed." Local universities also responded. Bars near campus improved surveillance systems. Student groups created buddy systems. Self-defense classes were offered. At Texas Woman's University, a memorial bench was installed under a flowering dogwood tree. The kind Jackie once said reminded her of spring. It's easy to see this as just another case, another tragic headline. But behind every name is a life, family, a future stolen. Jackie was more than a victim. She was a daughter, a friend, a dreamer. And now, her story continues to protect others. In the weeks after the trial, life in Denton slowly began to move forward. But for those closest to Jackie Vandegrift, normal was something they would never truly experience again. Her absence wasn't just felt, it echoed. It lingered in unfinished texts, in the silence of birthdays, in the ache of holidays where her laughter used to fill the room. Her college friends graduated without her. Her professors remembered the seat she used to occupy. And at home, the family photos that once marked joyful milestones now carried a shadow of grief beneath the smiles. But Jackie's memory didn't fade. Instead, her name began to inspire. Survivors of stalking and abusive relationships started coming forward, not just in Texas, but across the country. After hearing her story, college campuses that once overlooked subtle red flags in dating behavior began implementing clearer reporting systems. At one seminar, a freshman from a different university said, "I didn't realize what I was experiencing was wrong until I heard what happened to Jackie." The ripple effect was undeniable. Caitlin, who had once feared speaking up, now carried the weight of Jackie's story with fierce determination. She began working with advocacy groups, appeared on talk shows, and sat down for interviews, not for publicity, but for prevention. "We all think it won't happen to us," she said. "We all think we can handle it, until it's too late." Jackie's story can't be undone, but if it opens someone's eyes, if it makes just one person walk away before it turns dangerous, then she's still helping people. In a surprising twist, Charles Bryant later tried to appeal his conviction, arguing that his previous charges and Caitlin's testimony unfairly swayed the jury. But the Court of Appeals upheld the verdict. The evidence had been overwhelming. The jury, the judges, and the people had seen the truth. No amount of legal maneuvering could erase the facts. Meanwhile, Jakia's parents continued their fight for reform. It's not just through the foundation, but by lobbying state lawmakers to expand protections for victims of digital stalking and emotional coercion. In 2020, a bill known unofficially as Jackie's Law passed in the Texas legislature, increasing penalties for those who violate protective orders through electronic harassment. The media revisited the case often. Documentaries, podcasts, news specials all, aiming to tell Jackie's story to new audiences. But what made her story resonate wasn't just the crime. It was who she was. Her light, her spirit. The way people spoke about her not with pity, but with admiration. She believed people were good, her mother once said. And maybe even now, that belief is helping to make the world just a little safer for someone else. By the lake where Jackie was found, a quiet memorial now stands. It's simple just a plaque with her name and the words, "Loved, remembered, never forgotten." Every year, her family and friends gather there to lay flowers, light candles, and share stories. They don't focus on the tragedy. They focus on her life, the art she created, the children she wanted to help, the dreams she never got to chase. And that is where the story truly ends, not with a headline, not with a sentence, but with a promise that she mattered. She still matters. In the years following the conviction, Jackie Vandegrift's name continued to echo through college campuses, courtroom reform panels, and digital safety initiatives. But beyond the public efforts and news features, there were private reckonings, moments quietly unfolding behind closed doors that shaped how those who knew her carried on. People often talk about justice as a verdict or a sentence, but what happens after the courtroom doors close can be even more revealing than the trial itself. Jackie's closest friends described a grieving process that didn't follow a straight line. Some stopped going out at night altogether. Others became hyper-aware of their digital presence, blocking strangers, removing location tags, turning down party invites. One friend, Megan, described it this way: "We stopped trusting people, even the nice ones, because Jackie was always kind, always open, and it still wasn't enough to protect her." Her sorority sisters formed a private group chat named for Jackie, where they shared memories, milestones, even therapy updates. What began as a space for mourning slowly evolved into one of growth. One member got her master's in psychology, inspired by Jackie's goal of helping children. Another became a campus safety officer. "She's not just someone we lost," one said. "She's someone we carry." Meanwhile, Caitlin's role in advocacy deepened. Though she was never the intended victim, she was deeply connected to the man who ultimately took Jackie's life, and that haunted her. But it also fueled her. She started leading workshops on emotional abuse and manipulation, particularly the kind that doesn't leave visible scars. In one seminar, she shared journal entries she had written during her relationship with Charles. In them, she questioned her own instincts, apologized for his actions, took on the guilt that didn't belong to her. It was raw, painful, and real. Her willingness to be vulnerable created space for others to do the same. Survivors stood up after her talks and told their own stories for the first time. Some even reached out later to say that hearing Jackie's story, Caitlin's courage, gave them the push they needed to walk away from their own dangerous relationships. Law enforcement, too, began reevaluating how they handled early signs of stalking and manipulation. One detective who worked Jackie's case said in an interview, "We always looked for bruises or broken bones. We didn't realize that digital harassment, gaslighting, and control were signs of violence brewing." Jackie's case changed how we listened to victims. The story even reached national organizations. The National Network to End Domestic Violence partnered with Jackie S. Foundation to release a campaign aimed at college students called Check the Signs. It focused on the invisible indicators of abusive behavior: excessive texting, tracking locations, demanding access to personal devices, isolating someone from friends, all red flags that had once been ignored, even normalized. Jackie's face became part of that campaign, her smile, forever frozen in time, not as a victim, but as a voice. Even Charles's own background came under fresh scrutiny. Investigative journalists dug deeper into his past and uncovered a disturbing pattern of complaints, several from women who had reported his aggressive behavior to college staff, gym supervisors, and even mutual friends. But in each case, their concerns had been dismissed or minimized. "He's just intense," one person recalled being told. "He's harmless." That pattern, a system that failed to connect the dots, became a chilling reminder of how predators often rely on being underestimated. And yet, through all of this darkness, there were moments of light. Each year on Jackie's birthday, her family hosts a community fundraiser. At the first event, they expected a modest turnout. Instead, over 300 people showed up: friends, classmates, neighbors, and even strangers who had followed the case. They lit candles, released lanterns over a still Texas sky, shared the ways Jackie had touched their lives if they had never met her. Her father gave a speech that night. "Can't change what happened, but we can make sure the world remembers who she was, not for how her life ended, but for how she lived. Her laughter, her dreams, her fire." Jackie's story, like so many others, didn't end with the headlines. It continues through change, through advocacy, through the conversations that keep happening in dorm rooms, classrooms, and living rooms across the country. And so, the story of Jackie Vandegrift comes to a close, at least on paper. But the truth is, stories like Jackie's don't really end. They echo in the lives of those she loved, in the classrooms she never got to finish, in the dreams she was just beginning to chase. Her light, though taken far too soon, continues to shine through every life her memory touches. As we reflect on the choices, the red flags, the opportunities to speak up and intervene, we're reminded that awareness isn't just powerful, it's life-saving. If this story moved you, made you think, or opened your eyes to something you hadn't considered before, please take a moment to support this work. Like this video so it reaches more people who need to hear it. Share it with someone who may need to be reminded to trust their instincts. Leave a comment. We want to hear your voice, your thoughts, your reflections. And if you haven't yet, subscribe to the channel and click the bell icon so you never miss the stories that matter most. Thank you for watching. Stay safe, stay aware, and remember, sometimes the smallest action can protect a life. We'll see you in the next episode.